$530,000 versus $349,000. Two stars drafted in the same year, playing in the same league, both named All-Stars, both representing their country on Team USA. And yet, when the new WNBA collective bargaining agreement dropped just days ago, the salary gap between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese became impossible to ignore. The numbers are sparking a conversation that goes far beyond basketball, and today, we're going to unpack all of it, because this story is about much more than two paychecks. It's about how we value talent, what fair even means in professional sports, and whether the WNBA's new era is lifting all boats or just the ones with the biggest sails. Let's set the stage. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese entered the WNBA together in the 2024 draft. Clark went first overall to the Indiana Fever. Reese went 7th to the Chicago Sky. That distinction matters, and we'll come back to it, but what's important to understand is that from the very beginning, these two players have been linked. Their rivalry traces all the way back to the 2023 NCAA Championship game, when Reese's LSU Tigers defeated Clark's Iowa Hawkeyes in a contest that became one of the most watched women's college basketball games in history. From that moment forward, every interaction between them has been analyzed, debated, and sometimes blown out of proportion. In their rookie WNBA season in 2024, Clark earned $78,066. Reese earned $73,439, a difference of less than $5,000. Both salaries, frankly, were shockingly low for athletes generating the kind of attention and revenue they were bringing to the league. In 2025, that dynamic barely changed. Reese's salary inched up to $74,909, while Clark earned around $114,000 when you factor in bonuses. The gap existed, but it was relatively modest. Then came the new CBA. On March 18, 2026, the WNBA and the WNBA Players Association agreed in principle on a landmark collective bargaining agreement, over 17 months in the making. This deal fundamentally reshaped player compensation in the league. The salary cap jumped from $1.5 million to $7 million. The average salary is now projected to be around $583,000. The minimum salary for a player with 0 years of experience is $270,000, which, to put it in perspective, is higher than the maximum salary was just 1 year ago. For the first time, player salaries are tied to a meaningful share of league revenue, roughly 20% of gross revenue, up from about 9% under the previous agreement. By any measure, this is a seismic shift. But within this rising tide, a new provision has created what some are calling a two-tier system among young stars. It's called EPIC, which stands for Exceptional Performance on Initial Contract. Under this rule, players still on their rookie deals who achieve certain honors, such as making an All-WNBA team or winning MVP, can have their salaries renegotiated upward immediately. They don't have to wait for their rookie contract to expire. Caitlin Clark made the All-WNBA first team in 2024, her rookie year. That distinction now activates the EPIC provision for her, and according to ESPN's Alexa Philippou, Clark's salary for the 2026 season will jump to approximately $530,000. Looking ahead, she could earn a projected max of $1.3 million in 2027 and a super max of $1.7 million by 2028. Angel Reese, meanwhile, was named an All-Star in both of her seasons, but has not yet earned an All-WNBA team selection, which is the specific trigger for the EPIC provision. Her 2026 salary is projected at roughly $349,571. That's still a massive jump from her previous salary of under $75,000, but it leaves a gap of approximately $180,000 between her and Clark. Now, here's where the analysis gets important. Because when you look at this from one angle, the gap makes complete sense. Clark was drafted first overall. Reese was drafted 7. In every major professional sports league, draft position determines initial compensation. An NBA first overall pick in 2024 earned a guaranteed contract starting around $12.2 million annually. The 7th pick started around $5.3 million. Nobody argues that's unfair, because the structure is baked into the system. The WNBA is simply applying the same logic, and when you add in the epic provision rewarding on-court recognition, like all WNBA selections, the salary difference between Clark and Reese has a clear structural explanation. But here's the other side. And this is where the conversation becomes more nuanced. Angel Reese, during her 2 WNBA seasons, has been one of the most productive players in the league. In 2025, reports indicate she averaged 14.7 points, 12.6 rebounds, and 3.7 assists per game for the Chicago Sky. Those are dominant numbers, particularly on the glass. She set a WNBA record for consecutive double-doubles during her rookie year. The fact that she hasn't earned an All-WNBA selection has less to do with her individual production and more to do with the Sky's team record, which was a difficult 10-34 in 2025. Awards voting in basketball, whether we like it or not, tends to favor players on winning teams. Clark, for her part, was exceptional when healthy. In 2025, she averaged 16.5 points, 8.8 assists, 5.0 rebounds, and 1.6 steals. But she appeared in only 13 games before being sidelined for roughly 8 months with a groin injury. Both players dealt with health setbacks that complicated their seasons, yet their salary trajectories going forward now look markedly different. And here's what really amplifies this conversation: the off-court money. According to Forbes, Caitlin Clark earned approximately $16 million in total in 2025. Of that, only $114,000 came from her WNBA salary and bonuses. That means 99.3% of her income came from endorsements. She has the landmark 8-year, $28 million Nike deal that includes a signature shoe. She has partnerships with Gatorade, State Farm, and others. Her marketability, driven by unprecedented media coverage and cultural crossover appeal, has made her the highest-earning female basketball player in history. Angel Reese's off-court earnings tell a different, but still impressive story. Forbes estimated her 2025 earnings at $9.4 million, making her the highest-paid black woman in basketball and the 15th highest-paid female athlete in the world. Only about $75,000 of that came from her WNBA salary. The rest came from her extensive portfolio of brand deals with Reebok, McDonald's, Cash App, Good American, and others, along with podcast revenue and other ventures. She walked the Victoria's Secret fashion show, becoming the first professional athlete to do so. Reese has built a media empire alongside her basketball career. So when we talk about a pay gap, we need to be precise about what we mean. On the court, the WNBA's salary difference between Clark and Reese is roughly $180,000 for 2026, driven by draft position and the epic provision. Off the court, the endorsement gap is much wider, with Clark earning roughly $16 million compared to Reese's approximately $9 million in total off-court income. Combined, Clark's total earnings are nearly double Reese's. Fan reactions to this disparity have been intense and deeply divided. One camp argues that the market is the market. Clark draws higher television ratings. According to Nielsen data, nationally televised WNBA viewership dropped 55% when Clark was sidelined with her injury in 2025. FIBA national TV games specifically saw viewership fall from an average of 1.8 million before her injury to 847,000 after. If one player demonstrably drives more revenue, the argument goes, it makes sense that she earns more, both in endorsements and through performance-linked salary provisions. The other camp pushes back on that framing. Many fans and commentators point out that the media infrastructure around the WNBA was already skewed before Clark arrived. She received a level of coverage from her college days onward that no other women's basketball player had ever experienced, and that coverage created a self-reinforcing cycle of visibility and marketability. Angel Reese, according to this view, is just as talented and just as entertaining but didn't receive the same media amplification. The pay gap, from this perspective, reflects systemic disparities in whose stories get told and whose value gets recognized by the broader sports marketing ecosystem. There's also a racial dimension to this conversation that many fans and analysts have raised. Reese herself has spoken about it. The broader pattern in women's sports endorsements has historically favored athletes who fit a particular demographic and aesthetic profile, and some observers see the Clark-Reese earnings gap as consistent with that pattern. Others reject this framing entirely, arguing that Clark's earnings reflect measurable market impact and that attributing the gap to anything else is reductive. This is a genuinely complex issue, and it's worth acknowledging that thoughtful people hold very different views on it. Reese herself has been vocal and unapologetic about the broader pay disparity in women's basketball. On Instagram Live, she memorably said that her WNBA salary doesn't even pay one of her bills. While some took that as tone-deaf given her multi-million-dollar endorsement income, others understood her point. She was highlighting the absurdity that a professional athlete in a growing league could have a base salary under $75,000. Before the new CBA, the WNBA's maximum salary was around $250,000. Minimum salaries were around $64,000. These figures were, by any reasonable standard, not reflective of the league's trajectory. In March 2026, just before the CBA agreement was reached, Reese commented on the ongoing negotiations, saying, according to recent reports, "Everybody wants to play, but all of us want to play at what we should be compensated for." She added, "I'm just going to continue to be a voice." When the deal finally came through, she posted on social media, "Year 3 loading," signaling her readiness for the 2026 season. WNBPA President Nneka Ogwumike described the agreement by saying, "We always told you all we were going to stand on business, and that's what this looks like." Let's zoom out even further, because the implications here go beyond Clark and Reese. The new CBA represents a philosophical shift in how the WNBA operates. For the first time, player compensation is directly linked to league revenue growth. The average revenue share for players will be approximately 20% of gross revenue throughout the deal. That's up from roughly 9% under the previous agreement. For context, NBA players receive about 50% of revenue. So while the WNBA's new deal is historic within the context of women's professional basketball, it still reflects a significant gap compared to the men's league. But here's the thing that often gets lost in these comparisons. The WNBA's revenue base is a fraction of the NBA's. According to reports, the WNBA only recently generated enough revenue to trigger its revenue-sharing mechanism for the first time in league history, resulting in an $8 million collective payout to players in early 2026. The league is growing. Viewership records were set throughout the 2025 season, with ESPN averaging 1.3 million viewers across regular season games, up 6% year-over-year, and the WNBA recorded its most-watched regular season since 1998. But the total pie is still comparatively small. This creates a fundamental tension. Players like Reese are right that their compensation should reflect their value and the league's growth. And the league's position that revenue sharing has to be tied to actual revenue is also financially rational. The new CBA tries to bridge that gap, and by most accounts, it does so more aggressively than any previous agreement in WNBA history. but it also creates winners and losers among the players themselves. The epic provision rewards individual accolades, which means players on struggling teams, who may put up spectacular individual numbers but don't get the team success needed to earn All-WNBA votes, can find themselves on the wrong side of the salary curve. That's not unique to the WNBA. The same dynamics exist in the NBA and other leagues. But in a league where the salary range is still relatively compressed compared to the men's game, a $180,000 gap between two marquee players feels more significant. And then, there's the broader question of what rivalry means in the context of economic disparity. Clark and Reese recently represented Team USA together at the FIBA World Cup Qualifying Tournament in Puerto Rico, leading the team to a perfect 5-0 record. Clark won tournament MVP. Reese contributed strongly off the bench. Yet even during that tournament, fans scrutinized every interaction between them. Reports suggest that a moment where Clark appeared to bypass Reese during a celebration went viral, with some interpreting it as a snub and others calling it a completely normal, overanalyzed sideline moment. This is the reality for these two players. Everything they do is viewed through the lens of their rivalry, and now that rivalry has a dollar sign attached to it. When Reese sees that Clark's salary is $180,000 higher through a provision that rewards awards she hasn't won yet, partly because her team hasn't been competitive enough, that has to sting. When Clark sees commentary suggesting her higher earnings are undeserved or driven by factors other than merit, that likely frustrates her too. Neither player has said anything directly inflammatory about the other's compensation, and it's worth noting that both have generally spoken about the broader issue of WNBA pay with nuance. Looking ahead to the 2026 WNBA season, which begins on May 8th, the pay gap conversation is only going to intensify. If Reese earns an All-WNBA selection this year, she could trigger her own epic salary leap, potentially bringing their compensation closer together. If Clark returns fully healthy and puts up the kind of numbers she's capable of, her argument for even higher compensation only strengthens. Both players stand to benefit enormously from a league that is, by every measurable metric, more valuable than it was 2 years ago. The deeper question this whole situation forces us to ask isn't really about Clark versus Reese. It's about how professional sports leagues distribute value. Is it fair that two players drafted in the same class, both all-stars, both brand-building forces for the league, can have their salaries diverge so sharply based on a provision tied to awards voting? Is it fair that endorsement income, which dwarfs WNBA's salaries for top players, is shaped by media coverage patterns that players themselves don't control? Is it fair that the WNBA's revenue share for players is 20% when the NBA's is 50%? These aren't questions with easy answers. They're questions that reveal the growing pains of a league in transformation. And maybe that's the most honest takeaway. The WNBA is in the middle of the most significant financial evolution in its nearly 30-year history. Salaries that were under $80,000 2 years ago are now approaching $350,000 to $530,000 and climbing. A league that couldn't trigger its own revenue-sharing mechanism until 2026 is now projecting million-dollar salaries within a few years. The gap between Clark and Reese is real, and the reasons behind it deserve scrutiny, but it exists within a context where everyone in the league is earning dramatically more than they were just 12 months ago. So here's what I want to leave you with. Both Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are driving the WNBA forward in ways the league has never experienced. One of them earns more. That fact alone doesn't tell us who's more valuable, who works harder, or who deserves what. It tells us that the system, even a dramatically improved system, still produces unequal outcomes based on a mix of draft position, awards recognition, team success, media visibility, and market forces. The real question is this: as the WNBA continues to grow and the financial stakes get higher, Will this kind of gap bring Clark and Reese closer together in pushing for even more equity? Or will it become the wedge that defines their rivalry for years to come? I'd love to hear what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this video gave you something to think about, go ahead and subscribe. We'll be covering this story all season long.